huddling up and coming together on the first day of the month to pray together. Um, and if this is your first time, you're very welcome. And there's not like too much that you need to know. We are doing, I'm going to introduce our guests in a second, but as folks kind of trickle in, um, we use common prayer. This is a project that it was a really holy project, and I got to be a part of it with along with Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove and Anuma Okora, and we actually had dozens and dozens of people. Some were working on the songs, some were working on the artwork, the prayers. Many of the prayers and songs in here are hundreds of years old. So um, if you have it, awesome. If you don't, you can just go to commonprayer.net, or you can just hang out. It is no big deal. If you don't have it in front of you, we're going to do it. And there are phone apps too, by the way. But when you get a new phone, I think this is kind of that planned obsolescence that they say, like, things are built to eventually be outdated and you have to pay more money. Anyway, that's where we're at with the app for the iOS, for the iPhones and that kind of stuff. So we're trying to get it updated. Costs a bunch of money, and we have the app's free, so we don't make money. So it's a really tricky thing. But if you have an Android, I believe it is now updated and you can get Common Prayer. And some of you have the little pocket version. So I hope it's useful to you, and we love doing prayer together. So I like to do a little before we get jumping right in. I like to do a little bit of just the month at a glance, and so this is the month of March, and it is Women's History Month. That's why Jonathan's not here. He said there were enough men on the call, Dave, so he would just opt out today. But Jonathan is doing this great thing at Yale with Reverend William Barber, and so they have their hands full this morning. But we're excited about that. You'll see some of that on the website. But that means you got to put up with my singing this morning. Jonathan usually does the singing because he's a good singer, but he's taught me to tap into the deep bass, and that's what I've been doing as I rock the baby, Sally and Dave. Like I've just been singing deep, and I find it sounds better when you don't hit the notes right. But anyway, so March, couple things. This month is we don't confine or contain history to a month, but we do recognize the struggle and the fight for equality for women this month, Women's History Month. And there's some really powerful women and men that we remember, but particularly women, Perpetua and Felicity. I think we're actually going to read them in a second. And then there's Harriet Tubman that we remember. Each month we remember different months that or different dates that happened in the month of March through history. So this month we remember the student walkout in Los Angeles, where 20,000 students did a student strike and walked out of their schools in 1968 to advocate for around racial injustice and inequity. We remember Maximilian, who was one of the great war resistors. He said, I cannot fight in the wars of man. He's committed to Jesus and loving his enemies. Powerful story on March 12th. And it's also the day, March 12th, when Rutilio Grande was killed in El Salvador. And he was murdered brutally. And he was a real close friend of Oscar Romero, who was murdered just a couple weeks later during Mass as he was serving Mass. And they were obviously killed partly for their advocacy for folks who were being crushed in that violence. March 16th, we remember Rachel Corrie, who was crushed by bulldozers in the West Bank as Palestinian homes were being destroyed. And I remember when that happened, I was in Iraq with the peace team standing against the bombing and the war happening there when Rachel was killed. And there's countless Palestinian lives that have been killed. And we remember them too. But Rachel's life was one of those Westerners that was there in solidarity, and she was killed as a young woman in such a brutal way that her courage is something that we want to remember. So we do that on the 16th. Patrick, you may have heard of St. Patrick, but I don't know how much you know about him. So on the 17th, we remember St. Patrick's Day. Cyril, who was one of the great monastics that brought together orthodoxy, which means right doctrine. That's where we get the word doctrine, and orthopraxis, right practices, that we don't separate what we believe from how we live. And so we hear about that on the 18th. And on the 19th of March, we remember that bombardment of Baghdad and of Iraq, where 900 bombs a day were being dropped under the operation that's often called shock and awe, the shock and awe bombing. And Jonathan and I and many, many others were there trying to stand against that violence. So this is it's a powerful month, to remember the current violence, but also to try to learn from history rather than just to repeat it. We remember the Annunciation of Mary, which is also, it's when she kind of, got the word that she's going to have the Messiah. And this is our icon. These are all, I figure you appreciate these, Faith. These are all like originally made by an Orthodox artist. And so that's the one for March. Yeah, so that's awesome. So we're going to dive right into it in a second. But just so you know, a few other things happening this month at Red Letter Christians are we have book club every month. And we've got a great book this month, Nice Churchy Patriarchy for Women's History. And any month, a good month to read that book. But we'll be having that book, and you'll have all the details on our socials. We are organizing a Gaza ceasefire pilgrimage, a peace pilgrimage, and we're going to hear about the one in London too. But in case I failed to remember to mention the one in Philadelphia, Lisa Sharon Harper and I are organizing a walk from the Liberty Bell, the cracked bell, in downtown Philadelphia, and we're walking roughly the length of Gaza, just over 20 miles, which will land us at the headquarters of Lockheed Martin, one of the world's biggest weapon makers. And these are weapons that are being used in Gaza. Planes and bombs that are killing folks, and billions of dollars are literally being made from Lockheed Martin. So we'll have a prayerful direct action there on Good Friday. As Jesus was, we remember his death. We'll remember the death that's happening and the complicity of the U.S. government and also corporations like Lockheed Martin. So it's going to be a holy time. I mean, we're going to stay centered around Jesus, but we believe that our faith matters, right, to what's happening right now. And when Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," that's not just something we do after we die, but that's something we do right now in a world so full of violence. You can see photobombing me behind me is the icon of Christ in the rubble that we helped commission. And so we're constantly reminding ourselves, as Munther Isaac said, that Christ is under the rubble, that Christ is with those who are suffering, with the families in Gaza that are grieving the loss of their loved ones. So we gather this month for prayer. And I want to go ahead and introduce our guests, even though if you're new to this, we do our liturgy, kind of our prayer together, and then we pause when it says prayer for others. And that's when we get to hang out with each other and have a little conversation. So we'll do that in a little bit. But I'm excited to introduce three of my friends, and they're also incredible folks kind of helping to curate and caretake the Red Letter Christians movement in the UK. So Sally Mann and Dave Mann are over there. They're together because they love each other in a special way, and they're really wonderful. They've got a community going on the ground there that we'll hear more about. I've been able to stay there with them in their home and see all the great work they're doing, and it's very familiar to you guys. I mean, it's like I'm right now because the baby's going wild in the morning. I'm in the Simple Way where we started our community 25 years ago, and so many of the things that you're doing have the same charism vibe, and it's just wonderful. So it's good to see y'all. Thanks for being here today. And then our other guest, also really helping lead the Red Letter Christians in the UK, even though she's kind of got the dual thing going, the US UK belonging. And this is Faith Van Horne, who is, among other things, one of the leaders of the Red Letter Christians in the UK, but also a scholar and a practitioner of Pentecostalism. So she's awesome, and we're gonna have a great conversation. So thanks, Faith. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Shane. Hello.
Yeah. So y'all, we'll do the prayer part, and then it all blends together. But if you're ready, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to just take a little liberty to read from a few days ahead just the paragraph about Perpetua and Felicity, because we don't have anyone in particular that we remember today. So let's listen to this story. This is from 200 AD, so the 3rd century. Perpetua and Felicity, I think two of the incredible women of faith in our history. The relationship between Perpetua and Felicity began as that of a noble woman and her servant girl. But when they embraced Christ, they became sisters. Sisters in faith, and ultimately they became co-martyrs. They were killed together. In 2003 AD, or 203 AD, Roman authorities arrested 6 Christians and condemned them to death by the sword for their refusal to renounce their faith. Among these 6 were 22-year-old Perpetua, who had a young child. She was a young mother, and her former slave, Felicity, who was 8 months pregnant. Felicity gave birth while in prison, and the night before the execution date, her child was entrusted to a Christian couple. But eyewitnesses document that just before their death, the 2 women, now equals in Christ, soul sisters, embraced one another with a holy kiss. So it's one of those tragic stories of our faith, but also a story of tremendous love and courage in the face of evil. So we remember them. And this morning we say, "O Lord, let my soul rise up to meet you, as the day rises to meet the sun. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Come, let us bow down and bend the knee. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." Now, this is our song, and this is a song called Waters of Babylon, and some communities were singing this every day during the bombing of Iraq, and perhaps we think today of our friends that are singing this song all over the world. By the waters of Babylon, we laid down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. Let me try it one more time. That wasn't too bad. Lean into the deep notes. By the waters of Babylon, we laid down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. Take our tears, Lord, to water the seeds of prayer. And this is Psalm 6. I grow weary because of my groaning. Every night I drench my bed and flood my couch with tears. My eyes are wasted with grief and worn away because of all my enemies. Depart from me, all evildoers, for the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord accepts my prayer. Take our tears, Lord, to water the seeds of prayer. We've got 2 readings this morning, but I'll read the gospel from Mark chapter 1. The beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It is written in Isaiah the prophet, "I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way." A voice of one calling in the desert, "Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. And so John came, baptizing in the desert region and preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. The whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out to him. Confessing their sins, they were baptized by him in the Jordan River. John wore clothing made of camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. And this was his message: after me will come one more powerful than I, the thongs of whose sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. As Jesus was coming out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven: "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." At once the Spirit sent him out into the desert, and he was in the desert for 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and the angels attended him. Gospel of Mark. Take our tears, Lord, to water the seeds of prayer. And this is our quote for March 1st from another one of the great women of our faith, Julian of Norwich. In the 14th century, she said this: "The worst has already happened and been repaired. All shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well." Well, this is where we get to pause and have a conversation. Wow, I didn't read a beforehand. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but it was really powerful that it's such a prayer of lament and grieving and assurance that God is there even while our tears flood our couch or water the seeds of prayer. So the kind of universal timelessness of these prayers kind of hits you in new ways all the time. And it's good to see the three of you on my screen. And I know we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but let's start by just saying, how are you? You know, like we're coming with a lot of different things happening in the world right now. And I've always liked that old saying, on the darkest nights, we can see the brightest stars, but boy, it's some dark nights right now. So y'all, Faith, you tell us how you're holding up these days.
Well, yeah, thanks for asking, Shane. To be honest, I'm in the writing up phase of my PhD. So the way that that happens over here is it means that I've submitted a draft to my supervisor, and he said, "Okay, now you need to get it ready for your viva, which is essentially your oral defense." So uh, I've been I've been having a balance with Red Letter Christians and the phase of the PhD, but it is coming. And Dave and Sally have been incredibly gracious and patient with understanding that. And yeah, meanwhile, life here in Birmingham is it's going all right. We're starting to get
Yeah.
some sun, and we recently had our book launch, which was in London for our book, but we can talk more about that later. But yeah,
Yeah,
things are going
totally.
well here. Thank you.
And can you tell folks, the common people, what your PhD is about in a way that we can know what it
Yeah, of
is?
course. So I'm using basically a Pentecostal feminist approach, which a lot of people would think those things couldn't go together, which is one of the reasons that I'm doing this work. And so I want to look at what kind of a feminist Pentecostal theology has to say about looking at the doctrine of atonement. So that's one of those
Mm,
big, heavy church words. But basically, what it means that Jesus reconciles humanity with God themselves and all of creation. And so I want to say, what is it? The fact that all Christians are people of Pentecost,
mm,
whatever sect you come from or whatever segment of Christianity, all Christians um, honor Pentecost as the birth of the church. And what does it mean that we all enter into that place of Pentecost? And what does that mean for how we look at I'm looking at this as a way of looking at all doctrine, but I'm looking at a specific doctrine, this doctrine of
Yeah.
reconciliation, because it's like, what does that mean for people who've suffered abuse specifically? You know, there's a certain way of talking about, you know, Jesus died for our sins to take our punishment. And there are some people who are like, well, I've been punished a lot already. And so, like, there can be these images of God as being abusive. But what does it mean for us as the people of Pentecost who come out of, you know, this this light and this invigoration of the spirit to live into a different way? And what does Jesus
Yeah,
have
it's
to say
so
about that?
good.
How do we enter in? So that's kind of one way to talk about it.
Yeah, I love it. And I think yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we've talked about this some that there's some ways of thinking about why Jesus died that can make a monster out of God, that God needed blood and God was ready to kill
Mm,
us, but decided, nope, I'm just going to kill my son instead. And it becomes a really twisted way of thinking about God and has massive repercussions. Like it's not just like these are doctrines on paper, they influence how we live and act in the
mm-hmm,
world and how we view the death penalty and violence and war and abuse of women and people in general. So it's so good. Um,
mm,
yeah, and we caught the little Pentecostal fire. So the intersection of feminism and Pentecostalism, woo! If you want to know more, get in
yep.
touch with Faith. She's got it. So,
Yeah, you
and
can
yeah, go ahead.
email me. I was going to say, email me, put it out there. I would love to talk about it.
Awesome. And swinging over to you all, Dave and Sally, so good to see you. And your chickens are well. They're holding up.
Yeah, I was going to say we're not writing up PhD thesis, but we do raise rescue chickens. And I think similar to you, Shane, we're trying to find joy in our community, and we do find joy in our community through simple practices of shared life, like gardening, raising our chickens. And this helps us not to despair when the big picture of the world is just so overwhelmingly dark. And we're also organising both locally and through Red Letter Christians to try to make a Christ-like response to some of that darkness. So I know, like, you're organising your pilgrimage, and Dave's part of an organising group with ours. So maybe we'll just tell you a bit about our one. That might be good.
But I ought to point out that today is St David's Day as well, and Mandy from Wales leads our morning reflections, and she led yesterday. So she would say Borodar, good morning. But yesterday she led us thinking about St David's famous phrase, "Be joyful, keep the
Mm.
faith, and do the little things." And our vision in Red Letter Christians UK is to amplify the voices of and the actions of people who are living radical Christian lives and bringing light and joy even into the darkest situations, connecting us together and then empowering us to do even better than that. So we are
Yeah.
holding on to hope. And here in Bonnie Downs, we have three key values. Celebration is the central one. And
Whoop,
so
whoop.
even when we're dealing with hopeless immigration situations, terrible abuse, homelessness, we hold on to those little rays of light because that's the hope that we hold on to in faith that keeps us going. And then once we've done all that we can do, we see Jesus doing more amazing things than we can ever imagine.
Yeah. And we'll get to the other stuff, I promise, with the pilgrimage and everything. But I was thinking of that as you were saying that, both of y'all, that last night I posted a little picture of Elijah, our little boy, smiling and laughing, and with a quote from one of my mentors, which was, if we can't laugh, then the devil's already won. And there is something defiant about, you know, protecting our joy and the life-giving things, right? The like even just having chickens in the middle of the concrete. I mean, we have chicken. Sally, we're fixing up an abandoned house, and I went down there to check on the team that was there, and there's this rooster just strutting down the middle of Rohr Street in Northfield. I mean, this is total concrete, just like, what are you doing on the block? And I was like, I'm just checking on these guys, and he's like crowing, doing this thing, and like, we've now got several rescue chickens. I didn't even know we would have like wild chickens in the city, but we apparently do. And and getting our hands in the dirt, like laughing with kids. We just got a bubble machine so that we can produce bubbles all spring, like throughout the, one of the tougher corners. And so all of that joy is contagious. And it's also a part of resistance, right? Like saying that we believe love's more powerful than hatred, that light pierces darkness. And on the days where it's hard to believe that, we say, help my unbelief. And I need community to try to carry me through those hard times.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you want to say more about, I think like, I think that the one thing that's so important about Red Letter Christians is we're not just kind of activists jumping from one event to another. We're not just theologians, although there's plenty of really incredible, sharp theologians like Faith and others that are doing this work. But we're people that are trying to build God's dream in our neighborhood, to challenge the principalities and powers that stand against the flourishing of people in our neighborhoods. And so maybe just say a little bit more, Sally. I know I love hearing it every time, your history there, but give us a little brief, and then I promise we'll get into the book.
Yeah, our story is one that's kind of unusual like that, in that I'm the fourth of 6 generations to live in the same 4 streets here in the East End of London. And I never really knew my story was particularly unusual, or that my community was particularly unusual, because it's what I'm used to. But it is really a church where Jesus and justice go hand in hand. So we've always had this community organising feel to our church. We live really locally. And actually, we're pulling down our old church building, which is like a 1930s asbestos hut. And we're rebuilding it as a co-living project, because we all live locally, but we want to have space to live with people who are coming out of street homelessness. So we're going to have this, we're calling it an abbey. So we are an unusual Baptist church. We're going to have space for 8 homeless people to come live with us. Dave and me and one of our other ministers are going to move in, and just provide a rhythm of life there, with daily prayer, with food, growing food together, raising chickens together, cooking meals together. So that's our kind of community's journey, is to really hold Jesus and justice together. And it was really from knowing our story was worth telling that when we became co-directors at Red Letter Christians, we gathered other similar stories of people who are really committed to their place and are doing quite extraordinary things that don't often make the headlines. So that's why we created our book, because we just wanted to tell the stories. And because it's Women's History Month, there are some fantastic women's stories in here.
Yeah, dive right into it. Tell us.
Oh, it's women who are deeply committed to Jesus and justice in their communities. And that was what we wanted to do, to say, yeah, if the big picture is looking really dark and really overwhelming, that's true. But we can turn to the local and we can see the disciples of Jesus shining in that darkness. So, yeah, I think, Faith, you chose 2 women's experiences to really, and they're both conversion stories. So one is Mandy's story is really a conversion out of a childhood of trauma. So she was converted to become a disciple of Jesus. And then now she runs homes for women coming out of prison. So Mandy's story is that kind of conversion. And then Louise's story is also a conversion, but it's a conversion from middle-class Christianity, and to move into the margins and to live among people who she could learn what Christianity really looked like by sharing life with them. So we thought we might kind of do Mandy and Louise's story a little bit. Faith, have you got some of that to read?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love sharing both of their stories, because they're examples of people having very, very different experiences, and how, regardless of where you come from, Jesus is always meeting you where you're at to bring you to the margins. So we'll begin with Mandy's story. This is Mandy Ogunmukun, who, as Sally was saying, had a very traumatic upbringing, came from a background of sexual abuse and violence, drug use, was in and out of prison. And she found the Lord and got into a Christian rehab. And this is, I'm reading a segment of her telling of her story about how she came to work in prisons and help women transition out of prisons after having been in prison herself. She writes, God's purpose for me was to go back into the prison that I had spent years going in and out of, but now as a worker. In 2005, I became an apprentice CARAT, which is counseling, assessment, referral, advice, and thorough care worker at HMP, His Majesty's Prison, Holloway, my first paid job at age 45. I became a senior worker within 3 years and ended up winning a Butler Trust commendation for my work in addiction. Was invited to Buckingham Palace with my son. And then ahead, she says, I also carried the Olympic torch, which was quite amazing. They had people on each side of me playing trumpets. It made me smile that a heroin and crack addict and prostitute was carrying the Olympic torch. God certainly has a sense of humor. And the truth is that I am carrying a torch for women that are trapped in trauma and prisoners of their minds. I kept seeing women coming in and out of prison, and I would say, God, there has got to be more than this. He put it on my heart to go on a mission to support women. I started publicly speaking at the recovery course for Holy Trinity Brompton Church. That's a large church in London, telling people that we need houses for women coming out of prison. It was here that a man approached me and told me he had a house for me. It sent me into trauma, as nobody had ever given me anything for nothing except for Jesus. No human being ever had, and I didn't trust it. A year went past, and I was speaking again on the same recovery course. The same man approached me again. I didn't realize that I was afraid to step into my calling. However, I felt the fear and did it anyway. I filled the 5-bedroom house up with women, but still tried to hold on to my job in Holloway Prison. I needed to let the job go in Holloway, but I was petrified too, as I was so institutionalized without realizing. And she goes on to talk about the way that through God's provision and intervention, she has opened more houses for women coming out of addiction, coming out of prison, and just a really powerful, transformative story. So our other story, as Sally was mentioning, comes from Louise Jones, who lives in Winson Green at the New Biggin Community House there, which Shane, I know you're friends with Ash and Angie there.
I think I have a room there that I can
Yeah.
go to whenever. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is her telling her story about what she had to unlearn about kind of middle class white Christianity in a British context. And she's sharing about some experiences of her neighbors. Let me tell you a story about how I got to learn what my neighbors live with. If you miss an appointment with universal credit or one of the statutory conditions of your benefits, you will be sanctioned, meaning your benefit payments are reduced significantly for a period of time. This can have a devastating effect on people who rely on hand-to-mouth funding. And yet so many of my neighbors face sanctions as their lives don't fit the rigid timings for appointments set by universal credit. A lived experience team member, these are team members who have lived experiences of homelessness, set up a community consultation to address this gap in understanding between local services and those using the services. The local police and crime commissioner, council officers, and mental health services were invited to discuss what was happening. We wanted someone from the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, those who give out the UC sanctions, to come and hear the impact and stress caused by this particular part of the system. Around 60 local people came to share their stories. Most of our invited representatives came, except the DWP. They had accepted our invitation, but did not turn up on the day as something had come up. There was a tongue-in-cheek joke from the audience as the chair explained their absence. Maybe we should sanction them. This story is not to cast blame on individual statutory services or workers. It is to say that the systems are so inflexible for people in the community when something comes up, an everyday occurrence in a chaotic life. But those giving the sanctions can be excused. Justice, I am learning, is about equal grace for every person, regardless of life choices, class background, or social status.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so good. And as you were reading both of those, I was thinking of I think it was Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes over here, one of the, our great friends and great theologians, counselors, leaders, and she said that the conversion story is dynamic, right? It's not the same for every person. And especially as you look at the gospel, like some people are being pulled down and other people are being lifted up. The last are first, the first are last. So we're all born with different social locations and lived experience. And so conversion looks different, right? For some people, it's coming down from their thrones, and others it's being lifted out of kind of being marginalized. And Dr. Shaniqua even said for one person, it can even look different. You can be pulled out of being socially marginalized and begin to lose touch with where you came from. And it's a call to go back and participate in other people's liberation. So I think that's those two stories are beautiful. And Sally, I don't know if you want to say more about the collage of stories that you've kind of helped curate and piece these together. And I think one of the truest things we say about Red Letter Christians is that we're a web of subversive friends that love Jesus and justice. And that's the title of your book. We often say Jesus and justice go together like blades of scissors. But you've got this collage of different voices, and those are two of them. Do you want to say anything more about kind of how you collected these?
We brought together 25 stories, and they were from across Britain. And we wanted to choose people who were perhaps well known in terms of Christian activism. So there's a new story by Steve Chalk, Professor Anthony Reddy at Oxford University. But we really also wanted to add in stories like Louise's, of emerging leaders who were learning about Jesus and justice and could lead others on that journey. And then what we did is we kind of framed those stories around the beautiful vision of Shalom in Isaiah 65. And as we did that, and we started to draw themes and bring stories together, we invited some others. Shane, you took part in this, to read a few chapters and to dialogue with us about what the Spirit was up to. Because we really sense that, as you're experiencing in America, Christianity in the West it's kind of going through a bit of a deconstruction. Some of the things that used to work to hold it together no longer do. But we're convinced that the Spirit is at work through that, and that we can see in these stories of local people what might be coming next. So we're not just wanting to talk about the deconstruction. We're not wanting to pontificate about these things. We're looking for the Spirit of God. And we're seeing the Spirit of God in local communities as people go deep into their place. And so we're feeling really encouraged, actually. And those dialogues, we've got 6 filmed dialogues on our website, which is kind of like your website, but you just add .org.uk to the end of Red Letter Christians. And everybody can access those dialogues for free and can kind of take part in this conversation around what the Spirit's up to in the church as it's emerging out of the ruins of Christendom here in Britain. So the whole project has been so great for us. It's been great for us.
So good. And good stuff comes out of the compost. Yeah, cool. Dave, what were you saying, bro?
We called it theology for the feet. We wanted it to be the first word rather than the last word. And we didn't want, as you said, we didn't want people stepping back and saying, what an amazing group of saints doing amazing work. We wanted it to inspire and to challenge people to do what they are being called to do in their own situations. So it's very much inspirational. And we were trying to build bridges as well across the different sections of the church to get people to work together rather than disagreeing about the things that separate us, agreeing about all that brings us together, and working on what we have in common. Sadly, some people weren't comfortable with that approach and decided not to be part of it. But there's a range of theologies. But the thing that runs right through the centre of it is a love for Jesus and a passion for justice.
So good. And Julie on Facebook, we got a lot of folks that are commenting, and Julie says, great stories of faith. And our system here is not flexible. I was on state assistance as a single parent long ago and experienced that firsthand. Those systems, there's just a whole lot of bureaucratic barriers to compassion and generosity sometimes. And Dave on Facebook says, I wonder if there's a new Reformation happening, the deconstruction. And I kind of think of, Phyllis Tickle, one of our great friends that passed on to the other side. And she said, every generation needs a new Reformation. And she said, every few hundred years, the church needs a rummage sale, to get rid of the stuff that's cluttered it and to kind of remember the things that are treasures of our faith. And I kind of think of that deconstruction like when we're fixing up abandoned houses. Some of them, they look okay, but then when you get into them, their foundations are absolutely terrible. And you might not see it on the outside, but when you get into it, you're like, we had one house, Sally, that had a tree growing out of it, but you couldn't tell on the outside. And they were like, we're going to give you this house. I'm like, thank you, but I don't think we would take that even if you gave it to us, because it's about to fall in on itself. And I think there's parts of the church that their foundations were built around defending slavery and injustice, and it's hard to repair those roots. It's possible. I think God can redeem anything, but you got to do some hard work. And the Southern Baptists, I'm going to name names, they're not doing that hard work in our country, right? And there's other houses that we're renovating that they look pretty terrible, but it's all really surfacey. Once you get in there, you just got to rip some stuff down and put new sheetrock and new plumbing, and the house is ready to go. And so I think the point that you're making, David, and all of you, is that God's a God of resurrection, and old things are constantly being made new. And even through history, the church continually loses its way. And there are little movements sometimes that begin to go back to the words of Jesus. They go back to the Sermon on the Mount. They kind of pull us back into the practices, the like real grit of what it looks like to be Christian. Dave, I don't know if you want to say more about you like have done some things locally that I wouldn't have thought of, but I think it's kind of cool because we're all wired a little differently. So you look at this abandoned lot that's filled with trash and you go, what's God's dream? Well, not this. It's not for this entire neighborhood to just be kind of suffocating in weeds and trash and rubble. So you have reclaimed it, and I've been there to watch the sports games. But yeah, man.
Well, I think my great gift from the Lord is stubbornness and a holy discontent. And so when I see an overgrown jungle, I picture a playing field. And I think the thing about our sort of ministry is it's no good just complaining from the margins and the borders. It's a case of rolling up your sleeves. So I climbed over the fence and started cutting down 4 football pitches worth of 4-foot high grass and rubbish, and then we went into our local. It was a drinking club. It got disused, and we got in, started building ourselves, and then raised money. And again, in the area in our borough, which had the highest crime rate, and our borough is the most violent London borough. God called Sally and myself and our 3 teenage kids to go and to make a difference there. And we've turned round from one of the most violent areas through God's grace, and by building relationships with the drug dealers and having a price put on my head at one stage as well. But now it's one of the most areas with least crime, and educational attainment has gone up from 1/3 to 86-90% of the kids are graduating high school now because of that long-term investment. So it isn't a case of God calling the equipped. It really is with us. It's a case of God equipping the called, and actually His strength being made perfect in that, or God's strength, not His strength, God's strength being made perfect in our weakness.
Woo. Getting a little Holy Spirit up in here this morning. So we've got a little time to keep talking about. I want to make sure that we talk about connecting the local with the global, right? And we've done that, of course, as well. There's a lot of great teachers. For me, one of those is Martin Luther King, that said every time we drop a bomb overseas, we feel the second impact of it in our own neighborhoods by the bankruptcy of our schools, the lack of health care. So like when we prioritize military spending, it means that our schools literally are going without. And Dr. King said a country that spends more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching a spiritual death. And of course, he also talked about the morality of it. Every time we defend the violence of our government, we're teaching our kids that violence will solve their problems. And he said, what's wrong for our teenagers in the inner city to use violence is also wrong of our politicians. You cannot defend violence. Violence only produces more violence. It's all Dr. King. And I think of what we're doing right now is trying to think locally and build a neighborhood that looks like God's dream, but we're also working to build the world that God dreams of. And certainly what's happening in Gaza right now is not God's dream, right? I mean, it's hard to even keep track of it, but it's about 100 people every day that are being slaughtered. And this is happening by funding from the United States and the UK and especially from bombs that are made here in the US, the complicity of our countries to try to defend this violence. And I think we've always got to speak against hatred and anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. Any form of hatred is anti-Christ-like, right? Like God is love. And so what happened on October 7th was evil. And we all called it what it was, an act of evil, of terror to kill those some 1,200 lives. But since then, we've seen now 30,000 lives that have been killed, every one of them just as precious, just as much made in the image of God as the lives of those taken on October 7th. So we've been a part of organizing these pilgrimages, and I want to hear about the one happening in London. I mean, every time you look at that, the website too, it's like now there's like 140. A week ago, there were 120. They're happening in every continent except for Antarctica. So all over the world, these pilgrimages calling for a permanent ceasefire are happening. And tell us like how that stirred up and when it's happening, how it's happening on Maundy Thursday in London, bro.
Yeah, so we're doing it on Maundy Thursday. We're starting at 6 o'clock in the morning. We're going to walk. It's equivalent of 41 kilometers, 26 miles, which is the
In a
north
day.
and south
Wow. Yeah.
borders. Yeah. We're starting at a place in South London, south of the city, which is the base for the Anabaptist and Mennonite network. And then we're going to walk up through Bloomsbury Baptist, through the West End, through the city, and then out to the east. We're in the east, and we're going to have lunch, and we're going to be joined by some of our Muslim brothers and sisters in standing together against violence. And then we're going to move our way back through the financial districts of the Isle of Dogs and back to Amott Road at the end of that day. So that's Maundy Thursday, and there'll be details on the website if anybody's this side of the water.
Yeah, I think that's March 28th, right? So it's for folks, outside of kind of the religious language, that's the Thursday before Easter, the last week of March. And we're lightweights over here, Dave. We're going like 4 miles a day, not that far. So we're going to be going all of Holy Week in Philadelphia, but the similar length, right? The length roughly of Gaza. Also a reminder of how small this little piece of land is that's now one of the most densely populated areas of the world, with the imminent danger of even more violence that could cost so many precious lives. Half the population are children. Many of these are already displaced people that are located in Gaza as refugees from other conflicts. So they've already lived survived so much, and it breaks our heart every day. And so we're also hoping, I mean, the other thing about Red Letter Christians is there's kind of folks high church, low church, and no church that are everywhere. So it's amazing to hear about the interfaith element of it. We're going to have that in Philadelphia too. But it's cool to have some of the leaders that are in the established church. It would be amazing, if Archbishop Justin Welby and Chris Russell, others might join you. So I wonder, are you kind of inviting everybody that can to come out and join that walk?
Yeah, anybody who has a heart for peace. That's right. Who rejects violence.
And people can do just a little part. I'm not going to do the 26 miles in one day. People can come just for a part of it. But I think what's a lovely expression there is that it's prayer that we're putting our bodies somewhere and we're walking, and it's demanding that kind of focus as we walk, to really know that we're trying to stand with those who are working in these incredible places for peace, but amongst that suffering. So we've got connections as well with Bethlehem Bible College, and we've been on our website, we've got conversations with the leaders there and asking them, what can we do? And they said that actually when in London we're protesting, it encourages those that are working in the West Bank, that are working in Gaza. So once they said that, we knew, right, we have to be visibly present, because they see that and it encourages them in such a difficult situation.
So good.
And
go ahead, Dave.
Could I also ask for prayer for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine? It's the second anniversary of the big war, the Russian invasion, and we've been working with them for a number of years and have been there since the war started. They're exhausted, the Christians. The United Nations used the church to channel humanitarian aid at the start of the war, because they were the only organisation with the infrastructure and the integrity to make sure that the aid got to the places where it was needed. But that aid has more or less dried up now, and the churches, they've been living with hope and hope and hope, and they need a new refreshment and power from the Spirit. And as we all cry out for peace there, so please carry on praying for our friends.
Yeah, and it's sometimes we're so zoned in on what's happening in Gaza, as we should be, but there's these lives at stake in other places like Congo and the Ukraine. So it's a really important reminder. And we've talked about that on our podcast. Dave's been over there. They've got partners in Ukraine that are peacemakers, really working hard to try to de-escalate the violence. And so thanks, Faith. I want to come back to you we got a few minutes left I mean, when you think about this, I mean, there's some real principalities and powers at work. And, the Pentecostal church, we all pray in different ways. There's been times in Philly where maybe like we're fixing up an abandoned house where someone was killed. And we tell everybody to bring everything they got, bring your holy water, bring your incense, but other folks are kind of speaking in their prayer language. They're praying against the demonic forces. And that might be new for some folks. And just because something gets twisted, like some forms of Pentecostalism and even healing, you think of the televangelists that end up having private planes and really messing up some of what might have even started as a real genuine act of God that gets, commercialized and egos getting away and all that. But I still am a believer in that there are principalities and powers, there are spiritual forces, that prayer is something beyond just liturgy and script. So why don't you say a little bit about that as a Pentecostal scholar?
Yeah, well, as Red Letter Christians, we follow the words of Jesus, the words in red. Jesus empowers us to cast out demons. And, one thing that interests me is you look at different types of Christians, and it always fascinates me which parts of what Jesus said people like to take as metaphor and which parts they like to take literally. So it's like, if you've got the words of Jesus, do to the least of these, it's what you do to me. And Jesus says we cast out demons. It's like, what does that mean? It might mean something different in our lives. But, some people get really uncomfortable when Pentecostals use the language of the enemy. And when you see how some Pentecostals use that language, you can understand why. It's like, there are people who think, I don't know, the invisible forces have an interest in where their car keys are hiding or something like that. But I think it is really important to know that spiritual warfare is a real thing. And I think it's important that we're able to talk about it so we can talk about it responsibly, so that I think you've got this danger that you can fall on two sides of this. On the one side is, there are demons around every corner and we need to protect ourselves from like anything that could like defile us, and that means not getting your hands dirty. But the other kind of ditch we can fall into is saying, well, that language is entirely metaphor. It's really about us just bringing our best out of ourselves. And it's like, I do think that there's a danger. And I think one of the things we need to be careful about is not losing the reality that, there are powers and principalities. And, if we're just bringing our best and we're not being honest about that, and we don't remember that there are forces that are opposing that, we can that runs into its own problems. So I think it's important for me to talk about it, and for Christians to talk about it, not as a way to be like scared of demons around every corner, but as a way to say, we need to realistically use the language. We need to really think about what Jesus is saying when he uses that language, when he calls us to this work, and what it means in our context.
Yeah, it's so good. And sometimes I think of the principalities and powers, that language. It's so important that it also says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So we're not fighting actual human beings, but spiritual forces. But it also says, and authorities in high places. And so, it's interesting that some of this is about systems that are hurting people. And that people are hiding behind these. And I think of even, in Jesus's execution, everybody's passing on the blame and the burden of killing him. Pilate's washing his hands. So when we go to Lockheed Martin on Good Friday, one of our banners will say, "There is blood on your hands, Lockheed Martin." Like you literally have. You might not want to believe that you are directly participating, but Biden and our government that are blocking a ceasefire resolution, all these layers of ways that we try to say, like, I don't believe that Joe Biden would be able to personally go and do the things that our government is backing. And that's where this is about principalities and powers, right? That are ways that we can hide from feeling like we are directly participating and something so atrocious as what we see happening in Gaza. So, and these are spiritual forces. So thanks, Faith. And if you ever thought that, I'm a Pentecostal, I might not have a place in Red Letter Christians, I hope you think differently today, because we love the blend and the best of all the different kind of fusions of faith. And Sally, I want to come back to you. First of all, thank you for curating this wonderful collage of people. And sometimes it's hard to get a book. If you're outside the UK, you feel like, oh, I can't order that, but you can. And it's on the website. We'll link it up on our website and in the show notes to the prayer this morning. But redletterchristians.org.uk, and you can find the Jesus and Justice book. You want any closing words, Sally, as we kind of, I'll send us out in the final benediction, but go ahead.
I like the image that our editor Simon came up with about his hope for the book, and he said he was a Baptist minister in a kind of previous life, and he said that he described his work there as catching kite strings, and I love that. So he says this: "I'm running after a kite." This is when he was describing ministry. "I'm hoping to catch the strings of it. Not so I can control the kite, but so it can take me where it wants to go." The person asking me didn't think I'd answered their question what ministry was. They expected me to come up with a 3-point strategy to fix the church. My sense was the church was going somewhere. The wind of the Spirit was blowing through it. My job was to try and catch the kite strings. I feel this book offers people a whole lot of kite strings. Readers will want to catch some of these strings because they want to follow up the thinking of a story or dialogue. Others won't spark their imagination. But my hope is that every reader will catch at least one string and follow the Spirit into something. That was why we wrote the
So
book.
good. What a great hour together. Thanks for the book. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for the movement in the UK. So if you're anywhere near, I mean, there's really like these stories are scattered all over. Red Letter Christians is kind of, we don't care much about a brand or an organization. We care about folks reorienting their lives around Jesus and justice. And so, but we need to inspire each other, as the scripture says, fan one another's flame. So keep that Pentecostal flame alive, Faith. And so check it out. Connect with Red Letter Christians in the UK or over here across the pond. And I'll send you out with our benediction, which originated, I believe, in Northumbria, in a community there in the UK that was a part of the Common Prayer Project, and I'm gonna sing it, y'all. I sang this to little Eli when he was in the womb, so now when I think he already knows it, but this is that prayer. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen, y'all. Happy Mars.